the remainder contented themselves with knocking violently at the doors, and calling to those within to come down and open them on peril of their lives. No answer being returned to this repeated summons, and the detachment who had been sent away coming back with an accession of pickaxes, spades, and hoes, they, together with those who had such arms already, or carried, as many did, axes, poles, and crowbars, struggled into the foremost rank, ready to beset the doors and windows. They had not at this time more than a dozen lighted torches among them; but when these preparations were completed, flaming links were distributed and passed from hand to hand with such rapidity, that in a minute's time at least 2/3 of the whole roaring mass bore, each man in his hand, a blazing brand. Whirling these about their heads, they raised a loud shout, and fell to work upon the doors and windows. Amidst the clattering of heavy blows, the rattling of broken glass, the cries and execrations of the mob, and all the din and turmoil of the scene, Hugh and his friends kept together at the turret door where Mr Haredale had last admitted him and old John Willet, and spent their united force on that. It was a strong old oaken door, guarded by good bolts and a heavy bar; but it soon went crashing in upon the narrow stairs behind, and made, as it were, a platform to facilitate their tearing up into the rooms above. Almost at the same moment a dozen other points were forced, and at every one the crowd poured in like water. A few armed servant men were posted in the hall, and when the rioters forced an entrance there, they fired some half a dozen shots; but these taking no effect, and the concourse coming on like an army of devils, they only thought of consulting their own safety, and retreated, echoing their assailants' cries, and hoping in the confusion to be taken for rioters themselves; in which stratagem they succeeded, with the exception of one old man who was never heard of again, and was said to have had his brains beaten out with an iron bar. One of his fellows reported that he had seen the old man fall, and to have been afterwards burnt in the flames. The besiegers, being now in complete possession of the house, spread themselves over it from garret to cellar, and plied their demon labours fiercely. While some small parties kindled bonfires underneath the windows, others broke up the furniture and cast the fragments down to feed the flames below. Where the apertures in the wall, windows no longer, were large enough, they threw out tables, chests of drawers, beds, mirrors, pictures, and flung them whole into the fire; while every fresh addition to the blazing masses was received with shouts and howls and yells, which added new and dismal terrors to the conflagration. Those who had axes, and had spent their fury on the movables, chopped and tore down the doors and window frames, broke up the flooring, hewed away the rafters, and buried men who lingered in the upper rooms in heaps of ruins. Some searched the drawers, the chests, the boxes, writing desks, and closets, for jewels, plate, and money; while others, less mindful of gain and more mad for destruction, cast their whole contents into the court yard without examination, and called to those below to heap them on the blaze. Men who had been into the cellars, and had staved the casks, rushed to and fro stark mad, setting fire to all they saw, often to the dresses of their own friends, and kindling the building in so many parts that some had no time for escape, and were seen, with drooping hands and blackened faces, hanging senseless on the window sills to which they had crawled, until they were sucked and drawn into the burning gulf. The more the fire crackled and raged, the wilder and more cruel the men grew; as though moving in that element they became fiends, and changed their earthly nature for the qualities that give delight in hell. The burning pile, revealing rooms and passages red hot through gaps made in the crumbling walls, the tributary fires that licked the outer bricks and stones with their long forked tongues, and ran up to meet the glowing mass within, the shining of the flames upon the villains who looked on and fed them, the roaring of the angry blaze, so bright and high that it seemed in its rapacity to have swallowed up the very smoke, the living flakes the wind bore rapidly away and hurried on with, like a storm of fiery snow, the noiseless breaking of great beams of wood which fell like feathers on the heap of ashes, and crumbled in the very act to sparks and powder; the lurid tinge that overspread the sky, and the darkness, very deep by contrast, which prevailed around; the exposure to the coarse common gaze of every little nook which usages of home had made a sacred place, and the destruction by rude hands of every little household favourite which old associations made a dear and precious thing; all this taking place, not among pitying looks and friendly murmurs of compassion, but brutal shouts and exultations, which seemed to make the very rats who stood by the old house too long creatures with some claim upon the pity and regard of those its roof had sheltered, combined to form a scene never to be forgotten by those who saw it, and were not actors in the work so long as life endured. And who were they? The alarm bell rang, and it was pulled by no faint or hesitating hands, for a long time, but not a soul was seen. Some of the insurgents said that when it ceased they heard the shrieks of women, and saw some garments fluttering in the air as a party of men bore away no unresisting burdens. No one could say that this was true or false in such an uproar. But where was Hugh? Who among them had seen him since the forcing of the doors? The cry spread through the body. Where was Hugh? "Here!" he coarsely cried, appearing from the darkness, out of breath and blackened with the smoke. "We have done all we can. The fire is burning itself out, and even the corners where it hasn't spread are nothing but heaps of ruins. Disperse, my lads, while the coast's clear. Get back by different ways and meet as usual." With that he disappeared again, contrary to his wont, for he was always first to advance and last to go away, leaving them to follow homewards as they would. It was not an easy task to draw off such a throng. If Bedlam gates had been flung wide open, there would not have issued forth such maniacs as the frenzy of that night had made. There were men there who danced and trampled on the beds of flowers as though they trod down human enemies, and wrenched them from the stalks like savages who twisted human necks. There were men who cast their lighted torches in the air, and suffered them to fall upon their heads and faces, blistering the skin with deep unseemly burns. There were men who rushed up to the fire, and paddled in it with their hands as if in water, and others who were restrained by force from plunging in, to gratify their deadly longing. On the skull of one drunken lad, not 20 by his looks, who lay upon the ground with a bottle to his mouth, the lead from the roof came streaming down in a shower of liquid fire white hot, melting his head like wax. When the scattered parties were collected, men, living yet but singed as with hot irons, were plucked out of the cellars and carried off upon the shoulders of others, who strove to wake them as they went along with ribald jokes, and left them, dead, in the passages of hospitals. But of all the howling throng not one learnt mercy from, or sickened at, these sights, nor was the fierce, besotted, senseless rage of one man glutted. Slowly, and in small clusters, with hoarse hurrahs and repetitions of their usual cry, the assembly dropped away. The last few red-eyed stragglers reeled after those who had gone before. The distant noise of men calling to each other, and whistling for others whom they missed, grew fainter and fainter. At length even these sounds died away, and silence reigned alone. Silence indeed. The glare of the flames had sunk into a fitful flashing light, and the gentle stars, invisible till now, looked down upon the blackening heap. A dull smoke hung upon the ruin, as though to hide it from those eyes of heaven, and the wind forbore to move it. Bare walls, roof open to the sky, chambers where the beloved dead had many and many a fair day risen to new life and energy, where so many dear ones had been sad and merry, which were connected with so many thoughts and hopes, regrets and changes, all gone. Nothing left but a dull and dreary blank, a smouldering heap of dust and ashes, the silence and solitude of utter desolation. End of chapter 55.